Hello, my name is Melanie Boyer, and I'm the Program Director for Alabama Humanities Foundation. And I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you for joining us as we launch our virtual Rhodes Scholars Program. Also, a special thank you to our board and our new Executive Director, Dr. Lynn Clark, for supporting this initiative. I do want to just let you know, as this launch is taking place, we are so excited to offer you a copy of Miss Peggy Allen Towns' book, Scottsboro Unmasked, for the first 20 people who registered for this workshop. Secondly, we're going to provide a DVD for the next 20 people who actually signed up. So please join us each week. You never know what you might get. Next, I would like for you to hear from our Executive Director, Dr. Lynn Clark.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you so much, Rebecca and Peggy, for joining us for our first ever virtual Rhodes Scholar Series. We're very excited, and thank you to all of you who've signed up today. We encourage you to show up every Monday at 11 o'clock for some new content. I think this is going to be very exciting. Since 2010, Rebecca Davis has been preserving and sharing the history of her hometown and county as the archivist at the Limestone County Archives. In addition to keeping century-old documents in good shape, helping people research their history, and working to keep the historic 1905 L&N passenger depot standing, she shares the community story online, in print, and through special exhibits and presentations like this one. She gained a unique insight into Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys as a result of working with the papers and the family of Judge James E. Horton Jr., and with the effort to erect a monument in his honor. A University of North Alabama graduate, Rebecca has had previous careers as a journalist, co-owner, and a frugal living website, as well as a domestic engineer. We're so excited to have Rebecca here, who will be talking to you about Judge Horton, but she is also joined by noted author and Decatur native Peggy Allen Towns, who wrote Scottsboro Boys, Unmasked, Decatur's Story. Ms. Towns is a local historian of African American history, and her passion is preserving the voices and legacy of African Americans in her hometown. She lectures and facilitates workshops on genealogy, local people, and historical places. And thank you to you both of these scholars for kicking off our first ever virtual Rhodes Scholar Series. And thank you for supporting Alabama as we all work to step back into our lives, our scholarship, and our culture during the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you. Okay, so Melanie, are we supposed to take it away? Okay, well, let me get my slides ready to go. So we are, this is new for us too. So I want y'all to just kind of bear with us as we sort this out. I've been having a little bit of issues with my presentations not coming up, but we're gonna get this, we're gonna get it up right as soon as I get it on presentation view. Present. Okay, now, let me share my screen. Let's see here. All right. Share screen, desktop one. Okay, y'all get to see what we see. Share. Okie doke. Now, hold up. Okay. All right, we good? Okay, so as she mentioned, I'm Rebecca Davis. This is Peggy Towns, and we're going to talk a little bit today about a couple of specific aspects of this landmark case of Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys. And before we really get started with our presentation, I wanted to let y'all know where we are, because we together are sitting at Judge Horton's bench. And I'm going to pick y'all up for just a minute so y'all can set the scene. So you see Peggy there. Oh, and by the way, we have our Lysol and our hand sanitizer. I know some of y'all might be worried about our social distancing, but we're trying to maintain our health and yours too. This is the courtroom where Judge Horton made his monumental decision that we're going to be talking about. Now, much of the trial took place in Decatur. So this is in Morgan County, in the Morgan County courthouse that was there at the time. But Judge Horton was actually a Limestone County a circuit judge from Limestone County, and he presided over this courtroom. His monument to him, and his decision is now out front at the courthouse, so you can come by and see it even if you can't come in yet. And so with that, I wanted to get started with this story. I'm going to skip the first slide and come back to it. And I'm going to give Peggy the opportunity to go into a little bit of background before we get to the constructs of justice and the presentation that we have for you today. So Peggy.
It's a pleasure to be with you. In a twisted plight that began 89 years ago, the Old South's ideology of equality put at risk the lives of 9 Black youth who were falsely accused, convicted, and sentenced to die. No trials in America's history lasted as long or had as many appeals as the Scottsboro Boys, so-called because of the small town in Scottsboro where the first trial was held. All the trials but the first were held in Decatur, Alabama, and from these trials came 2 landmark Supreme Court rulings. So I want to ask you to come and walk with us as we share Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys. It's 1931, the segregated South, the Great Depression, hobos, Black and white, jump a train in Chattanooga, headed for Memphis. As the train crosses into Alabama, an altercation ensues. Words were exchanged, a fight broke out. The Blacks got the best of the whites, and the whites jumped off the train at Stevenson, where they reported the fight to a deputy. The sheriff calls ahead to Scottsboro, and the train had just sped by. So he calls the next town. And he gives strict orders, deputize every man you can and capture every Negro on the train and bring them to Scottsboro. At Paint Rock, a posse of enraged town folks armed with hatred, guns, and makeshift weapons pull 9 Black youth off the train. They tie them with plow line, herd them onto a flatbed truck, and carry them to Scottsboro, where a gathering lynching mob is waiting. At the time of the arrest, 6 of the boys were looking for work, 2 on their way to Memphis for medical attention, and 1 on his way to Sheffield, Alabama to live with an aunt. The Black youth, Haywood Patterson, Clarence Norris, Charlie Weems, who was the oldest, Olin Montgomery, nearly blind, was going to get eyeglasses. Willie Robinson suffered from VD so badly that his genitals were swollen and he had to use a cane to ambulate. Eugene Williams, the second youngest boy. Brothers Andy and Roy Wright. Andy had been an excellent student in school, but his father passed and he had to start working to help support the family. And the youngest, Roy Wright, this was his first time jumping the train. Little did they know their lives would be interwoven forever. To everyone's surprise, 2 women disguised as men, wearing men's caps, coats, and overalls, Victoria Price, who was 21, and Ruby Bates, who was 17, said to be of loose character. They had hopped the train the day before to Chattanooga and were returning to Huntsville, Alabama. After being quizzed by the townsfolk, the women concoct a story that they had been raped. 12 days later, the Scottsboro Boys were on trial with incompetent attorneys, Milo Moody, who was senile, and Stephen Roddy, a drunk. One by one, the verdict was guilty. A crowd of 1,500 cheered uncontrollably while a band played "There'll Be a Hot Time in Old Town Tonight." 8 of the youth were condemned to die in Alabama's Yellow Mama, the electric chair. Making history, it was the largest number of individuals ever to be sentenced to die at the same time in the state of Alabama. The youngest boy's conviction ended in a mistrial because of his age. In 1932, the Alabama Supreme Court affirmed death sentences for all except Eugene Williams because he was a juvenile. Appeals of death sentences led to the first United States Supreme Court ruling, Powell versus Alabama. Death sentences were reversed. A motion was filed to reopen or repeal the indictments, and a change of venue was requested. Not to Birmingham, granted, but to Decatur, 50 miles away. Retrials opened March 27, 1933. The prominent New York attorney Samuel Leibowitz accepted the case pro bono. Assisting him was George Chamberlain and Joseph Brodsky, international labor defense attorney. T.C. Allman, a local attorney, assisted as well with the jury selection. Thomas Knight, the youngest attorney general in Alabama at the time, was the prosecutor. A letter writing campaign from all over the world begged for justice. The Dream Team's first order of business was to take on Alabama's jury system. No Blacks had ever sat on Alabama jurors since Reconstruction. To prove that Blacks had systematically been excluded from jury roles, Leibowitz and his Dream Team went to the African American community. They met at the historic First Baptist Church in Decatur. They strategized and prepared lists of men they deemed qualified to serve on jury roles. About 30 Blacks were subpoenaed. They were well-educated professionals, business owners, property owners, men who did not worry about the backlash that they could have gotten because they testified. Cars rushed in on the courthouse lawn. Officers jumped out. They ushered the defendants into court. They had been on death row for 2 years since their arrest. Haywood Patterson was the first to go on trial in Decatur. Judge James E. Horton of Limestone County presided over the appeals. He had a reputation of being honest, decent, and respectful of the truth.
All right. So this gets us to, I'm going to back up just a little bit to a slide we skipped over. This gets us to the lard bucket. Now, this is no ordinary lard bucket. This is a bit of a time machine because to open the lid and to look inside is to step into the shoes of Judge Horton and walk around for a little while. Because in the spring of 1933, Judge received more than 700 letters, telegrams, resolutions, and he saved all of these, the newspaper clippings and so on, he and his wife Anna, in these lard buckets, and his family saved them, and they allowed us to open it up and step inside, and you can see from the very first person documents and writings and letters exactly what Between a Rock and a Hard Place was Judge Horton was during this trial. And so I want us to today, what I'm going to do, I'm an archivist, so what I do is I go back to the papers, and so we're going to look at these papers and we're going to take ourselves back to 1933 and to exactly all the pressure that Judge Horton faced from all sides and from around the world as this trial went on. So we'll get started with the trial, as you can see leading up, and I appreciate Peggy really setting the scene so well. So the first retrial of Haywood Patterson began in Morgan County on March 27th. And already people around the world were writing and begging for justice. And so I'm going to start in with this. Before I read any of these letters, though, I do want to note that some of these letters contain racial epithets and language which are demeaning by any standard. They're painful to read, they're painful to hear, but in an effort to present history in its most pure form, I will be reading these letters as written because they do help provide a true perspective of the unimaginable pressure that Judge Horton faced during this trial. And in a bigger picture, to pretend these attitudes and actions of bigotry did not exist is really to steal the victory from those who overcame them. So let's begin with day one of the trial. And the very first letter that arrived at Judge Horton's desk was from 10,000 Muslims, and it was signed by W.E. Muhammad in Detroit. He said, "Dear sir, we kindly ask you for a change of venue in these innocent boys' trial from Decatur back to Birmingham. Well, they will probably get a better trial there than way out in the woods. 10,000 Muslims, better known to you as Mohammedans, are demanding of you to free them Asiatic boys immediately, as it would be better for you all to drown, to jump overboard and drown, than to lynch one of them. Your country is in enough trouble now, if you don't know it, without making more trouble for you." And he goes on to say, we're going to ask you to do what you do to us in the near future. And then 2 days later, he received this letter from the head of the International Labor Defense. Now, this was the legal defense arm of the Communist Party. And so the secretary, F. Sigwart, in Chicago said, "Reading in the daily press of sentiments expressed by some of the residents of Decatur, Alabama, such as, we figure they'll get what's coming to them. And if those lawyers won't attack the South and behave themselves, there won't be any trouble, clearly indicates that a lynch spirit is being engendered by the ruling class of Alabama against the Scottsboro Boys. Therefore, we, as members of this organization, realizing that you, the presiding officer in this case, being fully aware of the tenseness of this situation, demand that you use all of the powers at your command to safeguard the lives of these innocent youths. We further demand that Negroes be permitted to act as jurors as well as whites, and they to be of the working class, as the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution grants equal political rights to white and Negro citizens. It is therefore imperative that it be put into practice. These steps are necessary at all times, and we hold you, as well as the governor, responsible for their safety. Yours truly, F. Sigwart, Secretary." So of the more than 500 college-educated Negroes in Morgan County, none were chosen for this jury. Of the all-white, all-male jury, 4 of those dropped out before ever reaching high school. These were the men that Horton addressed as the testimony began. And you can see here, this is the actual transcript of the trial that's available at the Morgan County Archives. I won't read all of this part, but I will say from what Judge Horton said. "I've been the judge of your court for a number of years, and I feel that I can say with a degree of congratulations to the jurors of this county, as well as the other counties, that so far has been able to see all the jurors that have ever sat on juries have been actuated by the highest motives, that they have tried so far as they knew how every case according to the law and the evidence, and they endeavored to render a true verdict in every case. I have confidence in this venire which has been summoned that they will continue to do so. Now, gentlemen, under our law, when it comes to the courts, we know neither native or alien. We know neither Jew nor Gentile. We know neither black nor white, native or foreign born, but to each it is our duty to mete out even-handed justice. There is no other way of enjoying the fruits of liberty except by following out the law as laid down to you and obeying the law as it is." So with that, the trial began. And when I get to your point, just flag me down. So one of the first to testify was Victoria Price, one of the accusers. And among her testimony, Leibowitz, Patterson's lawyer, asked, "Did you ever point out to anybody, that is to any official, prosecutor, solicitor, sheriff, judge, anybody, here, these Negroes say they're innocent. There's the proof of their crime. Look at it. Did you ever say that?" And Victoria Price she was like trying to pin Jello to a wall, basically, asking her any questions. She said, you remember it's been 2 years ago. And the Attorney General said, we object. The Negroes didn't say they were innocent at that time. Judge Horton asked, did you ever say that to anybody? And that's when Victoria Price pointed across the courtroom to Patterson and said, I don't remember whether I did or not, but I do know one thing. That Negro sitting over there raped me, Haywood Patterson. The Leibowitz said that's for the jury to say, and Judge Horton said, just answer the question. She stated she didn't know. So it went on with her testimony, and before the first day was over, the National Guard Captain Joe Burleson learned that a carload of folks from Huntsville and Scottsboro were coming to, quote, take care of Leibowitz. And so Burleson said, okay, open the Keller Memorial Drawbridge. And if you've ever tried to get in Decatur through the drawbridge before I-65 was built, that was a pretty effective barrier. And so they came to the drawbridge and they turned around and left. But there were plenty of people in Decatur who had the same sentiment. And that night, 200 people gathered in a lodge hall in Decatur and planned a mob attack for the next day. What they didn't know is that Judge Horton had an informant in the crowd. And so he came back and reported to Horton. And on the second morning, the judge ordered the jury out and he addressed the audience before the second day of testimony began. And among what he said to the audience is this. Now, gentlemen, this is for the audience, and I want it to be known that these prisoners are under the protection of the court. The sheriff and his deputies and members of the National Guard are under the direction and authority of this court. I say this much, that the man who would engage in anything that would cause the death of any of these prisoners is a murderer. He is not only a murderer, but a cowardly murderer, and a man whom we should look down upon with all the contempt in our being. And I'm going to say further, that the soldiers here and the sheriffs here are expected to defend with their lives these prisoners, and they must do it. Listen, gentlemen, you have the authority of this court, and this court is speaking with authority. The man who attempts it may expect that his own life be forfeited, or the guards that guard them must forfeit their lives. I'm speaking with feeling, and I know it because I'm feeling it. I have absolutely no patience with mob spirit, and that spirit that would charge the guilt or innocence of any being without knowing of their guilt or innocence. I will say this much. So far as I'm concerned, I believe I am as gentle as any man in the world. I don't believe I would harm anyone wrongfully. But when it comes to a question of right or wrong, when it comes to the very civilization, men, no matter how quiet they are or how peaceful they are, there comes a time when they must take a stand, either right or wrong. And with that, he brought the jury back in, and Haywood Patterson testified on his own behalf. Of course, he immediately professed his innocence. And among his testimony, Attorney General Knight asked him about who he was being tried for raping. He said, I haven't raped any girl. I haven't seen any girl. Knight said, you didn't do that? Patterson said, no, sir, I didn't do such a thing as that. I pulled this white boy back up on the train and saved his life. Knight said, stop talking except when you're being talked to. Leibowitz said the witness is being tried for his life, and I think his answers are perfectly proper. He stated being a colored man, he wouldn't think of doing a thing of that kind with a white witness present. Horton asked, did you say that? Patterson said, yes, sir. I said what the lawyer said. Knight asked, I will ask if you were in Scottsboro. You were tried at Scottsboro? Patterson said, yes, sir. I was framed at Scottsboro. Framed at Scottsboro? Yes, sir. Who told you to say you were framed? I told myself to say it, Patterson said. Now, while all this was going on, letters and telegrams were streaming in to Judge Horton's bench the whole time. Many of these were from communist groups who'd been mobilized in this massive, it was sort of the hashtag campaign of its day. And this became a sensational case on the level of O.J. Simpson that we might remember in recent memory, one of the first ones of that day. There were protests. Many of them were some of these were from the very street in Harlem where people were protesting, Lenox Avenue. This one was from the International Labor Defense, William Patterson, who said 160,000 American workers, members, affiliates, International Labor Defense protest, attempt, lynch Scottsboro Boys and Leibowitz last night, and suppression of this news. We demand full protection for the Scottsboro Boys and their defenders and hold you responsible for their lives and safety. There were also postcards like this one from Atlantic City. W.W. Harvey said, the way it seems, Lincoln-esque judge, prejudiced state's attorney, bigoted solicitor, excellent counsel for defense, moronic jury, moronic defendant, moronic plaintiff from W.W. Harvey, Atlantic City. This is one of the first issues where we saw women gathering in mass to protest. One of the first since women's suffrage. Working class women said we vigorously protest incitement speech of Attorney General Knight and organization of mobs of KKK threatening lives of non-innocent Scottsboro boys and Attorney Leibowitz. We declare that the workers will hold you responsible for the lives of the boys and their attorneys. We demand the immediate changing of the trial from Decatur, the center of mob rule and lynchings, to Birmingham. We further demand the immediate dismissal of all charges and the immediate release of these non-framed Scottsboro boys. And this is from the United Councils of Working Class Women in the Bronx, New York. The Finnish workers chimed in and said that they, 15,000 members of their organization vigorously protest against lynch terror, threaten the Scottsboro boys and their councils. Stop. We demand the immediate disposal of mobs threatening to lynch Scottsboro defense and defense witnesses. Stop. You will be responsible that the Scottsboro defendants get an impartial and fair trial. As you can see, all of these folks were holding Judge Horton personally responsible for the lives of these boys. The Lithuanian working women said, in the name of 3,000 members, we demand immediate release of these non-innocent Negro boys. We hold you responsible for the safety of these defendants, defense attorneys, and witnesses. And let's see, my bad. And then Negro citizens in a New York barber shop. This was right there on Lenox Avenue where people protested and clashed with police. We, the Negro people, gathered in a barber shop at 409 Lenox Avenue, demand the release of non-Scottsboro boys, safety of lawyers and witnesses. If they are lynched, we hold you and the state responsible. 16 Negro citizens. The root beer shop folks got in there too in Harlem. We residents of Harlem hold you personally for the safety of non-Scottsboro boys, Ruby Bates, Lester Carter, and the defense lawyers. If any harm is done to them, we hold you and the state of Alabama responsible. Release the Scottsboro boys now. And then this is something I want us to know. This will come up a couple of times. Some of the most hateful letters that Judge Horton and others received were anonymous. And I'd like to think that these might be the great granddaddies of the internet trolls of today, because it's always easy to be a big man when you don't have to put your name on the line. And so this one, signed Justice. Judge Horton, you're warned herein that if any of those Scottsboro boys go to jail or die in the electric chair or lynched, or if any harm comes to Mr. Leibowitz, and if you continue to conduct your court as you are, objecting to every question the defense puts up, your, quote, life won't be worth 1 red cent. There's no justice in your state. This is not a letter to annoy you or scare you, but use your own judgment, cracker, because it may take 1, 2, or 3 more years to get you, but may God have mercy on your soul if these boys be convicted, or if you don't give Gentleman Leibowitz a break. You're a judge, so use your own judgment. And this threat isn't from a crank. Signed, Justice. This is where you come in?
Yes. So in a dramatic show, Ruby Bates, who had been missing for a few months, enters the courtroom, fashionably dressed. The accuser is not a witness for the defense, but is not a witness, for the prosecutor, but now for the defense. She recants her story, and she tells about staying in the hobo jungle while they were in Chattanooga. So Leibowitz asked, why did you lie? She said, I told her just like Victoria did, because she said we might have to stay in jail if we did not frame up a story after crossing state lines. Locals were furious. The Klan and potential lynchers met. The old bridge, as Rebecca said, at Decatur was raised to stop the lynch mobs coming from Huntsville. Bates was taken to a secret location in Decatur. Double security was put on Leibowitz and the other defense counsels. Burning crosses blazed in broad open daylight. The African-American community armed themselves to protect their families. Dr. Bridges of Scottsboro examined the women within 2 hours of the alleged attack. And as Judge Horton questions him, many people wondered why the judge was so involved with the questioning. Well, let me tell you, Judge Horton once practiced medicine or in school for medicine prior to becoming an attorney. So, Dr. Bridges said, there was no crime, no trauma, no bleeding, no signs of hysteria, no signs of a gun butt against the head, nothing to corroborate the woman's story.
All right. So with all of this testimony, with all of this, this evidence, that it was time for it to go to the jury for deliberations. And Judge Horton's statement was published in the New York Times. And among other things, are you ready for me to say that?
No,
Okay.
I'll say that.
Okay, go ahead.
So, in a quiet but stern Southern voice, Judge Horton instructs the jurors. And one of the things he said, gentlemen, you're not trying whether or not the defendants are white or black. You're not trying that question. You're trying whether or not this defendant forcibly ravished a woman. And he goes on to say, take the evidence, sift it out, and find the truths and the untruths and render your verdict. We are a white race and a Negro race living here together. We are here. And then he concludes, wrong dies and truth forever lasts, and we should have faith in that. For 22 hours, the jury deliberated. Some of that time spent assembling a jigsaw puzzle.
And when they returned their verdict, they said, one short sentence in large penciled letters, we find the defendant guilty as charged and fix the punishment at death in the electric chair.
And for the second time, Haywood Patterson was sentenced to die in the electric chair. The judge postponed the other trials because of the racial tension that was running so high in Decatur.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, as you can imagine, with all the letters, there came quite a bit of reaction to the verdict, both positive and negative. This, I won't read the whole thing, but this is one of maybe 100 of these exact same resolutions that Judge Horton received from communist group. This was the Young Workers of Birmingham. And they resolved about the conviction that, they said Haywood Patterson was one of the innocent Scottsboro Boys framed on a rape charge. He was convicted, sentenced to die, in spite of the fact that Ruby Bates and Lester Carter, two eyewitnesses, emphatically denied the rape story. And the evidence showed conclusively to all that the boy was innocent. And they said the whole trial was seething with vicious race hatred stirred up by the KKK, that even during the procedure, the prosecution, they said stooped to the lowest depths of vilification and called, they asked the jury, are you going to stand for justice bought and sold for Jew money from New York? Ruby Bates couldn't understand everything told her in New York because it was in Jew language, and go on in mocking everyone. They demanded that the verdict be set aside, be given a new trial, a change of venue from Decatur to Birmingham be made because of the lynch threats, and that the remaining cases be continued until the case of Patterson was determined in higher courts, and that Negroes be allowed to sit on the jury. Then, so there were several of these demanding this. Now, not everybody also liked the way that Judge Horton handled the case. I'm going to read this one from, quote, a Civil War veteran of the North that was extremely unkind. Judge Horton, April 11th, 1933. Why are you so sympathetic with these Negro rapists? You did everything possible in your charge to the jury to get them off. Anybody with a grain of sense knows that these New York nigger lovers, where white girls parade Broadway arm in arm with Negroes, bribed this Ruby Bates to recant on her evidence at the first trial. But these Jews and communists got your goat. Just because these poor white girls are poor white trash, you're one of those aristocratic Southerners that think they're in the same class with niggers. So you endorse the statement that has been circulated, broadcast in magazines and newspapers that the mill girls of the South supplement their meager earnings by prostitution on the side? If that is true, then in these days of the Great Depression, maybe daughters of judges like you and daughters of busted bank presidents will be supplementing their livelihood by prostitution on the side. What a vile reproach you are to the old-time Southern manhood, catering and fawning as you did upon these Northern imported nigger-loving lawyers, telling the jury in your charge about the character of these girls. How do you know about their character? Is it a crime for a destitute white girl looking for a job to don men's clothing and go to work? These niggers have had 3 years of fat living in jail. The decent people of Alabama should take them out and give them the rope so that chicken-hearted judges like you could not hang garlands around their neck. How about the little white schoolgirls going along country paths to the rural schoolhouses? If you let these niggers off, that's what they'll be doing next, attacking some little white schoolgirl 10 or 11 years old. Do you not know that these ministers in New York who deck this girl Ruby Bates out in finery are so rotten that they preach social and marital intercourse of whites and blacks every Sunday in their hellish pulpits? Why was Einstein so indignant at the idea of punishing these rotten niggers? He was able to restrain his indignation when he read about two white girls being raped by 9 Negroes repeatedly. But as soon as it is proposed to punish the brutes, Relativity Einstein commences writing letters to ex-President Hoover about it, the lousy, dirty Jew nigger lover. Yours truly, a Civil War veteran of the South. Now, not everyone who wrote was so hateful. On that very same day came this letter from Hallie Farmer at Alabama College in what is now Montevallo, University of Montevallo. She said, my dear Judge Horton, since it appears from the papers that you're receiving many letters condemning various phases of the trial, which recently took place in Decatur, it occurred to me that you might like to know that there are thoughtful people in Alabama who have watched your handling of the difficult situation with a keen appreciation of the impartiality and ability with which that case was conducted. Many of us who read the charge of the jury in the New York Times were proud to know that there were judges in Alabama who were willing to do such an able piece of work, even though it might be unpopular. Many people have expressed this opinion to me, and I take pleasure in passing it on to you with the hope that it may in some small measure counteract the pain given by some of the criticism which you are receiving. Letters came from all over. This one came from Victor Seawell in Paris, France, who sent in a clipping from the Daily Mail of Paris, and he basically said there shouldn't be one law for the white man and another one for the black man. That's a sap to the very fundamental principles of our government. And so he believed in what Horton was doing. And then you've got these the workers of Jamaica in New York who also sent a telegram to Judge Horton saying that they vehemently pressed the Scottsboro decision as the most outrageous legal lynching in the history of the United States, in which the courts of Alabama have aided and abetted the bestial terror of the white ruling class. We further protest the action of the courts in going on with this trial after its framed up character was manifest and open knowledge to the protesting world at large. We believe and hold that the Alabama courts have, in this case of the 9 Scottsboro Boys, played the dastardly role of a white ruling class in suppressing the national oppressed Negro minority. As workers, we recognize this act as an offense against the working class, and we therefore demand the immediate, unconditional, and safe release of the Scottsboro Boys. So, on April 15th, 1933, Patterson, there's Leibowitz flanked by his people, so he submitted a motion for a new trial. And then he started talking. And what followed, it kind of riled everybody up. This was the Alabama Supreme Court Justice, Joel Brown, who sent this letter saying, you need to take a look at this. I think what's called for is a good idea. He sent this to Judge Horton with the clipping that said, that quoted Samuel Leibowitz saying about the jury, if you ever saw those creatures, those bigots whose mouths are slits in their faces, whose eyes pop out at you like a frog's, whose chins drip tobacco juice, bewhiskered and filthy, you would not ask how they could do it. When I got back home, I felt that I needed a moral, mental, and physical bath. That's Mr. Leibowitz's opinion of the people of Alabama, among who he proposes to go once more for the trial of the remaining defendants. We say without hesitation that when he appears again, the court should tell him politely but firmly that he cannot appear in any court in Alabama. And then we've got, so with that, on April 17th, 1933, on what should have been a routine sentencing procedure, Horton set the death sentence for Patterson as recommended, but instead of setting an execution date, he suspended it on the motion for a new trial. And he postponed the trial of the next defendant, Charlie Weems, and the rest of the Scottsboro Boys, saying he could not prevent these outside influences affecting the jury. He told them, with these influences still existing, with the public mind still disturbed, with thousands of true and patriotic citizens desiring that justice be done and the South appear in its true light, there has come to my attention a statement published which to my mind makes it impossible at the present time to fulfill the high purpose of a court of justice. The published statement was uncalled for. It was addressed to a panel of highly intelligent jurors and men who wished to do what was right in the case, but the statement itself must of necessity make impossible any just and impartial verdict to be rendered at this time, to be arrived at this time. And so Horton entered the motion to continue the arguments for the new case to June 22nd. Of course, everyone had a reaction, including Leibowitz. He sent a long letter to Judge Horton, and because he was not there, but he said, I read with interest the account of the proceedings before you in Decatur. Your comments from the bench were undoubtedly intended for public consumption, and this is my reply. The prejudice you refer to was there long before the trials were transferred to Decatur. The prejudice was born of the hatred for the Negro and was first manifested when these poor unfortunates were hurried through the machinery of justice at Scottsboro to the tune of "There'll be a hot time in Old Town tonight." It was intensified by the reversal of convictions at the hands of the Justice of the United States Supreme Court. It was intensified by the motion made to quash the indictment and veneer because of the systematic exclusion of qualified Negroes from service upon the juries solely because of their color. It was intensified when young men stood at the entrance of the Decatur courtroom and hawked pamphlets ending in a ringing plea that Alabama and the world will finally see justice claim its own and will see the Negroes receive their just deserts. Death in the electric chair. It was intensified by the Attorney General when he applauded vociferously with his hands, leaped in the air like a frenzied rooter at a football game, and shouted with glee at a point which he thought a witness had made that was favorable to the prosecution. It was intensified when the solicitor for Morgan County Wade Wright referred to Jew money from New York, to Lester Carter as Carterinsky, and to Mr. Brodsky of the defense counsel as the creature with the long nose and pack on his back. It was highly intensified when the Attorney General, pointing at the defendant during his argument to the jury, referred to him as that thing. Again, evidence of bigotry and hatred toward the Negro, and anyone who attempts to get a measure of justice for him, was most graphically demonstrated by Attorney General when, in his address to the jury, he offered as reason for not calling important Negro witnesses the fact that, quote, "We in the South do not call a nigger to corroborate a white witness, no matter who the white witness may be." And he said, no verdict has received of any jury has received more universal condemnation at the hands of the enlightened press of the world than the verdict of this jury. And so he said the postponement of this case is undoubtedly a blessing to both sides. Now, at the same time that Leibowitz was sending this letter, this arrived from the KKK in Birmingham. They had a resolution praising Judge Horton, saying he conducted the trial fairly and to the best of his ability, and in the interest of fairness and justice has indefinitely postponed the retrial of the remaining Negroes. The North Birmingham Clan number 179 of the realm of Alabama, of the Invisible Empire, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in conclave assembled, do hereby resolve to commend and endorse the actions of Judge Horton and to notify him of our commendation and endorsement on 18th of April, 1933. Now, what's interesting to me as the local government archivist here, who we have the local papers there at the Limestone County Archives, you don't see a whole lot about Judge Horton and about this whole case written in the local papers. It was something I think that folks kind of wished would go away, the folks in Decatur, Scottsboro, and in Athens. But the Limestone Democrat, one of the two papers here, the other one's the Alabama Courier, did praise his decision to continue the hearing of the remaining Scottsboro case. And he said that the presiding judge could very properly continue the case until the mental atmosphere could be cleared. The decision was in keeping with the commendable manner in which Judge Horton conducted the Patterson case, and therefore he has been praised. It says the instances cited in Judge Horton's statement and his own conduct of the case prove most conclusively that substantial justice may be obtained by a Negro in the South, even when charged with the same crime as imputed to the Negroes in the Scottsboro case. And then just to give you an idea of some of the varying opinions, obviously I'm not going to read this whole page. These also were published in the Limestone Democrat. You had the thoughts of the Scottsboro Sentinel, home of the original case, and then also the Baltimore Sun outside of the area. The Scottsboro Sentinel said the sudden decision of Judge Horton to continue the trials of the other Negroes until some future time because of statements made by Leibowitz in which the New York attorney slurred the jury and the Morgan County people was the cause of some criticism. They said until people understood, they said the decision of Judge Horton to do as he did will probably meet with approval all over all sections of the county. As any fair-minded person from every section of the country could hardly say that Leibowitz or the other Reds were even trying to honestly assist the Negroes in the trial proceedings. The Negro at Decatur was convicted on the same basis as conviction in Jackson County 2 years ago, on evidence. And we actually believe his defense in 1931 was far superior to his defense in Decatur. The propaganda are not enthusing as many as you might believe, nor are Southern Negroes losing their heads at the promises and sproutings of the strangers in their midst. The best friend any Southern Negro has is the class of Southern white people who have never offered to fraternize with him. The Negro's most painful experiences with white people is that class offering to associate him with inequality, just to use him. So far as our own county and town is concerned, we wonder how much disappointment some of our northern contemporaries would find if they dropped in for a few weeks' stay and actually found two races of people living together in harmony and respect toward each other in the same towns and communities. The Negroes not molested or in any way uneasy over the Scottsboro case or any other attempt at hatred and agitation by outsiders. And then the Baltimore Sun basically just called it a fine Alabama judge, and they said in performing his difficult role with such eminent fairness, Judge Horton has made a distinguished contribution to his state and the nation. Now, I also wanted to show just this letter from the editor of the Decatur Daily, just because Ben Bloodworth was asking if Judge Horton would please let him know when he decided to move again, because he said that he had, in one of the telegraph companies there in Decatur, had cleared 135,000 words of press copy. The message was being destined for points all the way from Birmingham to London and Paris. So you can see how this had gone around the world, and the whole eyes of the world were on Judge Horton. What was he going to do on June 22nd when he had extended the case? So June 22nd, 1933, it was hot. It was 105 degrees outside when Judge Horton stepped out his front door, which was literally 1 block north of where I'm sitting right now. He walked that block south in his suit, in his 3-piece suit and boots, to this courthouse. He climbed up the marble steps to this courtroom, sat down at this bench, and he started reading. For 65 minutes, he sat right here and read page after handwritten page of evidence and legal precedent, all leading up to one landmark decision. Now, I know we don't have the time for me to read that entire decision today, but I would like to get down to the bottom line of his decision. He said that social order is based on law, and its perpetuity on its fair and impartial administration. Deliberate injustice is more fatal to the one who imposes it than to the one on whom it is imposed. The victim may die quickly and his suffering cease, but the teachings of Christianity and the uniform lesson of all history illustrate without exception that its perpetrators not only pay the penalty themselves, but their children throughout endless generations. To those who deserve punishment, who have outraged society and its laws on such, an impartial justice inflicts the penalties for the violated laws of society, but even to the taking of life itself. But to those who are guiltless, the law withholds its heavy hand. The court will decide this motion on the sole consideration of what is its duty under the law. The vital ground of this motion, as the court sees it, is whether or not the verdict of the jury is contrary to the evidence. Is there sufficient credible evidence upon which to base a verdict? History, sacred and profane, and the common experience of mankind teach us that women of the character shown in this case are prone for selfish reasons to make false accusations, both of rape and of insult, upon the slightest provocation, or even without provocation, for ulterior purposes. The court will not pursue the evidence any further. The testimony of the prosecutrix in this case is not only uncorroborated, but also bears on its face indications of improbability and is contradicted by other evidence. And in addition thereto, the evidence greatly preponderates in favor of the defendant. It therefore becomes the duty of the court under the law to grant the motion in this case. It is therefore ordered and adjudged by the court that the motion be granted, that the verdict of the jury in this case and the judgment of the court sentencing this defendant to death be set aside, and a new trial is hereby ordered. This June 2nd, 1933, James E. Horton, Circuit Judge. Now, of course, folks had a response to this as well. The local hometown paper, on the low down on the page below the death of a judge, put on the on the local paper that, for the third time, Haywood Patterson was given a new trial by Judge Horton at this case. They said the judge had already made up his mind. He didn't allow any argument, but at once began reading his opinion, which was lengthy. And at the conclusion, he announced that the verdict was set aside and a new trial granted the defendant. They said, what will follow this decision, we do not know. Evidently, there must have been some sort of crime, or there would not have been such an uprising of public opinion. Now, Judge Horton began receiving telegrams from all over. This one from Elmer in New York said he believed this would go down in our history as an epoch-making reaffirmation of the American principles of impartial justice and equality before the law. And then you have this one, and I find that the angrier people get, the worse their handwriting gets. W.H. Pears was not happy. He said, I've noticed you're getting a wide space in Negro or Animal Kingdom and alien un-American newspapers for a couple of days. This hate is not from an admirer of you for practically freeing a bunch of degenerates. Heathen niggers have been laughing up their sleeves for a long time, saying rape would be no more than stealing chickens when they got through with the Scottsboro case. And he goes on to say that I don't believe the Supreme Court would uphold this decision because, with the exception of two, I believe the remainder of them would do anything on both sides to get a Negro vote. For the good of this great white race and safety of this country, the white race should rule and govern according by law. And then finally, I wanted to just mention this editorial from Jonathan Daniels in Raleigh, North Carolina. And he said that in his editorial, he sent this letter and included the clipping, saying that nothing is more obvious today than that the sense of fairness of the people of America will never allow the Scottsboro defendants to die for the capital crime with which they are charged. If Alabama determines to continue the trial of these cases and the demand for a capital verdict in them, the agitation will continue, the vilification of the South will continue, and the Southern justice everywhere will remain suspect. But the Negroes will never be legally executed. He said the practical as well as the just course should dictate that Alabama, moving with dignity as Judge Horton has moved, drop the cases and reassure the nation and the world that justice and reason are still the gods of an advancing South. Now, I would love to say that Jonathan Daniels was right, and this has a very happy ending of truth, justice, fairness, and the American way. But we know that's not always the American way. In the aftermath, following this is this picture always as a mama breaks my heart. This is his mom, Haywood Patterson, with his mama during the trial. And after the Alabama Supreme Court removed Judge Horton from these cases, and he gave Patterson's next case to William Callahan from Coleman.
The known supremacist.
Yes, white supremacist. The jury there found Patterson guilty, and Patterson said of Callahan, he couldn't get me to the chair fast enough. The rest of the boys were quickly found guilty, one after the other, jumping in many times. And then the U.S. Supreme Court again reversed the convictions in 1935 because blacks were excluded from the Patterson jury. Patterson was again convicted in 1936. In 1937, the state dropped charges against 4 of them. By 1950, they pardoned the rest. But Patterson himself ended up living a very violent life in prison. He was involved in many fights, many attempts on his life, stabbed many times. He finally broke out in 1947. He fled to Michigan. He wrote a book, and he ended up back in prison charged with manslaughter. In 1952, he died in prison of cancer. He was only 39 years old. And as far as Judge Horton, now he ran for office again. And while, according to this ad, the home folk supported and commended him, he said, you know, I have done what I thought to be right as the judge of this court, no matter what the personal cost to me might be. And so although the home folks supported him in 1934, the personal cost was political suicide. Judge Horton lost his bid for re-election. He never again returned to public office. He actually picked up his home that was a block north of here, moved it down to South Limestone County in Greenbrier, where it still stands today, and his family still lives there today. And he raised Black Angus cattle for the rest of his life. That's a picture of him in his later years in front of his antebellum home. But now, many years later, this case did make a difference. It continues to make a difference in this country today. The case of Patterson versus Alabama is a landmark Supreme Court case that sets the precedent that for Black defendants, the jury pool must include African Americans. And in 2013, as you can see in this picture, the state of Alabama granted all these boys posthumous pardons, and that's their descendants there with the governor at that time. Now, I don't think Judge Horton ever forgot about this case and what it meant to him, to the state, to the South, to America. I mean, after all, he is the one who kept all these newspaper clippings for years in these boldly labeled lard buckets. And I don't think he regretted his decision. You know, if you asked him up to his dying days, he would say, I learned this phrase at my mother's knee, one she learned from her daddy before her. Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall. So with that, that tells the story of Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys. Now, if you enjoyed this, I do want to, before I turn it back to Melanie, just give you a preview of what we've got coming up, if that works for you, Melanie. Next, right now we have with us, as you mentioned, Peggy Allen Towns. This is, so let's see, she's got a book with her here today, Scottsboro Unmasked. Now she goes into a lot. Would you like to tell just a little bit about this book?
My book actually is about the story of Decatur during the trial and the impact that trial had on locals. And it's the first of its genre, actually, that talks about the impact that the trials had on us here in Decatur.
That's right.
So my book is different as it goes into first-person accounts and that kind of thing.
Right. And as you can see, Peggy is she does a wonderful job of telling the story. And if you want an autographed copy, this is her number. You can give her a call and get in touch with her to get an autographed copy. I do see we have some questions coming up on the chat. So I'll address those as we go through in just a moment. Oh, I don't know if y'all can see that. I'll close that down for a second. Okay, now if you like this, I would like for you all to come back here next week. I won't be in the courtroom, I'll be at the archives, but I will be presenting about Sisters in Suffrage, the first female voters of Limestone County. As you may all know, this year, 2020, marks the centennial of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote in this country. These are, right here, this picture that you see on the screen, are some of the very first women who, and of course there's a man there, these were all teachers at Trinity School who went together to register to vote. And so, and in fact, one of the ones that we saw as one of the very first voters was Anna Frierson, who at the time was a widow, and she went on to marry Judge Horton. And she's the one who helped him keep up with all of these letters. She was one of the very first voters in 1920 in Limestone County. And so if you come back here again, same same place, same channel, on May 18th. We can learn about that. And then 2 weeks after that, this won't be a live presentation, but if you are from Alabama, the South, especially the Decatur area, you're familiar with this cookbook. This is a cotton country cooking, and it's just a classic cookbook for the South and for here in Limestone County. And so I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the history of the book and of Belle Mina, where the first recipe is going to be taken, and showing you how to make eggs Creole. So you can come back for a little history and cooking show on June 1st here. And so with that, I will take it back to Melanie. And let's see if I can see the chat. I was going to look and see if you all had any questions. Thank you so much for your comments, Cynthia. Let's see, and Lynn as well. You're right. Dorothy Walker said it's interesting that the last person's editorial name was Jonathan Daniels. It's also the name of Daniels was the name of the white seminary student. Let's see, let me get this where I can read it. Killed in Lowndes County in 1956 when he shielded Ruby Sales from a white man holding a shotgun. Interesting, there's also someone in this case named Ruby. So that's interesting. You're right, that is interesting. I'll look that up. Craig, I appreciate your comments about the documents and pictures. As an archivist, obviously, I'm partial to first-person documents and accounts. They really can take you back. That's one thing I love about going back to the records. So, yes, let's see. I'm looking through your comments as we go. I wasn't able to look at it as we're doing. There is not a historical marker at the Horton home, but there is a historic marker right outside the Limestone County Courthouse at the west side entrance next to the monument that tells the story of Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys and one of those bronze markers. And so
there is an Alabama historical marker at the Morgan County Courthouse.
That's right.
Where all the trials were held, with an exception of the first one.
That's correct. Judge Horton, you asked it, I'm wanting to say off the top of my head, he's buried at the Athens City Cemetery. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to get back to you for sure, but I want to say he's buried at the Athens City Cemetery, which is just a few blocks that way down Washington Street. I believe that's where thank you all for your positive comments. We really appreciate you being here. We can't see anyone on here other than us. And so I didn't know if we were just talking to ourselves, but Peggy and I can talk to each other all day long. That's okay.
This has been great.
Now, I have not had any contact with any descendants of the Scottsboro Boys, although
yes, Norris's son lives in Georgia.
Okay.
Actually, Clarence Norris Jr.
Okay.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. I would love to get their comments and thoughts on all of this too. That none of the boys all of them, if you read into the aftermath, they all ended up with just
horrific,
really horrible lives. And you just can't help but wonder what would have happened if they hadn't gotten on that train, or if those two young women had not gotten on that train.
Or if they had not lied.
Right. Right. Exactly. And so.
And I think where we've talked about this, one of my things in making presentation is to talk about the courage of people, because particularly with such an egregious act, it takes strength to stand up for what is right.
That's right.
And we didn't mention it, but a local attorney, Clarence Watts, out of Huntsville, Alabama, was a defense counsel at one point.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and that's kind of my point with going through all of these letters, is to show that Judge Horton and Judge Horton did not set out to be a civil rights hero. His family, going back into the 1800s, had owned slaves, and he grew up with help, in his household.
That's true.
And so they were, antebellum prominent family and so on. And so he did not set out to be a civil rights hero. He just fully believed in the law and in evidence and in justice and yes, and that led him to do something that it was extremely difficult for him, and that he bore the consequences. But up to his dying days, he said, I wouldn't have gone back and done anything different. Now, I don't know how much more time we've got. If Melanie can cut us off if we want to. I want to answer this question, though. Indy Barton asked if this will be available for classroom use. Thank you so much for asking that. We would love for this to be used in classrooms everywhere.
Absolutely.
And it will be available on YouTube at the Alabama Humanities Foundation's YouTube channel. You can go to alabamahumanities.org to find those links. I'm sure Melanie will have more information about that. This is all being recorded. The recording, I believe, will still be available on Facebook Live. But YouTube will probably be the easiest way to do that. And I'm sure those links will all be shared as, after post-production. But yes, this is normally both of us go into classrooms and speak about history in different cases. And with COVID-19, we haven't been able to do that. Normally this time of year, I'm going into a classroom nearly every day to talk about Limestone County history. And so to be able to still provide that sort of enrichment, we would love, love, love for you all to use that. Let's see, family accounts of these events. I don't have any family accounts. What I have is what Judge Horton saved, but I'm sure there are family accounts. I just don't know if any of them have ever been made public. Donated. They would have probably had been donated to some sort of archives or, university. I would love to know the family's thoughts on all of this. I do know that Haywood Patterson's mama and Ruby Bates, spent years afterwards with they spoke on behalf of the Communist Party. Absolutely. And of their sons throughout the world. And so some of those speeches may have been transcribed in newspapers, and even I know there is some footage of some of those where they would have publicly told their story.
And there were two African-American reporters who also sat in on the Judge Horton's courtroom. They were given passes. And so in the Afro-American and the Baltimore Journal, their accounts of the trials, which are a little different from the other accounts because we see out of different eyes.
Oh, absolutely. 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 So yes, a good point about Dorothy Walker said your presentation about the Scottsboro Boys makes me think about the Central Park 5 case.
Yes.
Because those boys didn't know each other either, but were brought together through circumstances and history. And that's true. These boys were not all friends. And in fact, when they were all kept in jail together, they really didn't get along that well.
That's true. Only 4 knew each other.
Right, exactly. Yep, similar to Federal Judge Frank Johnson. Michelle, we would love for you to share this with your students. I know many folks teachers are using Google Classroom, different things. I'm sure you can work together with Melanie and the Alabama Humanities Foundation to be able to how best to get that to your students. But we would love for you all to share. Do we go outside of Limestone County to present to students during normal times? Yes. So I am a scholar with the Rhodes Scholar Speakers Bureau. And so I have actually delivered this Judge Horton and the Scottsboro Boys presentation around the state. And you can book through Alabama Humanities. If you go to alabamahumanities.org to the Speakers Bureau page, the Rhodes Scholar page, you can book not just me, but there's scholars from all over the state that do an outstanding job of sharing stories from history and law and all aspects of the humanities. And the Humanities Foundation subsidizes that, so it's a very small. I believe it's $50 to book a Rhodes Scholar the first time, and because the Humanities Foundation subsidizes our stipend and our travel and all that. And I would love to get back on the road and speak to you all, not just about this, but Sisters in Suffrage. That's a brand new presentation. I'm still finalizing it today and this week. And so I would love to not only present it this way, but to come to meet you all in person. It's just as grateful as I am especially to Judge Baker for letting us be here in the courtroom, and for Alabama Humanities for making this possible today. Thank you, Melanie. Y'all just don't know how hard Melanie has worked to make this happen. She's incredible, and this is her idea. And so as much as we love this and we're so grateful we can do this, there's just nothing like coming to speak to people in person and being able to interact with the audience and to answer your questions in person. But I'm so grateful to all of you who are here today. So, all right, I guess with that, that's all the questions I see, unless I overlooked one. So we'll pop it back to Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, ladies, for doing an amazing, outstanding job today. You guys were riveting. I think we have one question from the audience. I'm going to try to connect. Miss Allen.
Oh, yay. Let's see, make sure she's unmuted. Let's see. I can't unmute you, Cynthia. Is that somebody who's trying to
unmute? And she may have changed her mind as well. So I do want to take this opportunity to again say thank you, ladies, for doing a great job. We do have a signed copy of Miss Peggy Allen Towns' book for the first 20 people who registered. And we also have a DVD available that we can send out as well. Basically, just telling the story of the Scottsboro Boys. I do want to finish by saying that we do have a Rhodes Scholars program. And as soon as we are in a position to start again, you can book a Rhodes Scholar. There is a $50 charge for community organizations to book to have Miss Rebecca Davis to come out, and hopefully Miss Towns will join us as a Rhodes Scholars as well, and you can book her or any other of our scholars. You can find the information on our webpage at alabamahumanities.org. And lastly, I do want to say that we have launched a new page on Friday, it's a Connect page, where this information will live, and next week's recording and presentation by Rebecca will also be there as well. So yes, you will be able to share this with your friends, family, and with your classroom. Again, thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to see you next Monday at 11. Thank you.
Thank you.